Hi everyone, thanks for joining me, Chad here. In this video, I'd like to talk to you about some considerations when picking a chromatography resin. While I'm focusing mostly on preparative chromatography, you could maybe apply some of these concepts to other types of chromatography, like analytical chromatography. Okay, so let's say we want to do ion exchange chromatography. Specifically, we want to use a Q resin. It's just randomly picking one. So here is a resin selection guide from Cytiva for ion exchange chromatography. You'll notice that there are a lot of resins listed in the middle column. The crazy thing is that there are 10 different kinds of Q resins. Why do you think Cytiva would make 10 different kinds of Q resins for preparative chromatography? It seems crazy, but it isn't. You'll find that other chromatography companies like Millipore, Bio-Rad, or Toso also make lots of different kinds of Q resins. And this isn't something unique to Q resin either. There are lots of different kinds of resins for each kind of application. The reason there are 10 different kinds of Q resin is that the physical characteristics of the resins themselves play a key role in the performance during the run. They can make or break your purification entirely. After you decide what kind of separation technique you're going to use, affinity, ion exchange, and the like, the next thing you need to consider is the performance of the resin. These characteristics include ligand density, size of the base media, pore size of the matrix, the spacer molecule between the ligand and the bead, and stability, just to name a few. So if we're looking at Q resins, we could imagine something like these down here with varying degrees of size, porosity, or whatever. You can start to see how you could end up with 10 different kinds of Q resin. The practical application of this can be shown in this idealized case that I drew here. In this example, we're sticking with ion exchange, so let's say Q still, and we start with the chromatogram on the top in the center. Here we have two peaks that aren't separated enough, and our goal is to get a clear differentiation between them so that they're effectively bimodal. Among our choices to be able to accomplish this task is to change the gradient, perhaps to make it so that the run ends at a lower concentration. I mean, it isn't our only option, but it's definitely a good place to start. So what happens more often than not, though, when we do this in reality, is that the peaks just get broader and shorter as we change our gradient. Maybe there's a little bit more separation, but it's really nothing to brag about. In this case, using a different resin would really probably improve our results. One physical property to consider is the size of the bead. Typically, the larger the bead gets, the lower the back pressure as you run. The trade-off with this larger bead, though, is that the resolution goes down. Conversely, the smaller the bead, the better the resolution, and the higher the back pressure. Here, in this image, you can see how bead size could affect a chromatogram. So in the separation problem given in the previous slide, a better choice might be to use a smaller resin. The pore size or bulk of a bead is another property to consider. The more porous a bead, the larger the available surface area there is. This in turn will allow for more space to pack a ligand onto an individual bead. For higher porosity, the trade-off again would be lower resolution. You can see how this could very well be the case in these photographs of porous and non-porous beads. The porous beads that are commonly made up of something like cross-linked agarose have more nooks and crannies to hold up targets than non-porous beads. And the pore size is what allows different size exclusion resins to have different fractionation ranges. So now, steric hindrance can prevent a protein from binding to a ligand attached directly to a bead. Affinity and group-specific affinity are especially sensitive to spacer length, since the ligand binding sites of proteins are often deep inside or in some pocket. IEX and HIC are not so much, because the exterior of a protein is often a patchwork of possible binding sites. Generally speaking, larger protein targets will require a longer spacer. Most spacers in preparative chromatography are between 4 and 12 atoms. Hydroxyapatite from Biorad is an interesting resin in my opinion, where the ligand is the base bead. It's actually a mineral, so it has no spacer. Stability is important to pay attention to as well. Stronger resins allow you to use higher pressures, which result in higher resolutions, but the higher pressures resins typically require the use of smaller columns. They have less ligand and are difficult to use with glass, so you're going to have a harder time purifying a lot of protein. You'll just be able to purify a little bit of protein. Most resins, like agarose, are stable over large pHs but require low pressures. Hydroxyapatite is not stable at low pHs, and silica beads are rigid and to withstand high pressures but have poor stability in strong alkaline conditions. Together, this means that not all resins are equal. If you're struggling to purify a protein or some other kind of biomolecule like DNA, it can often be helpful to try different resins with the same kind of ligand. Going back to our earlier example of ion exchange, like the Q column, right? It'd probably be better to try another kind of Q column, one that is higher pressure, non-porous, and has a smaller bead. Conversely, if you were doing analytical chemistry and you want to purify more protein, it may be better to go with a resin that has more porous nature and is easily able to scale up. This really emphasizes the benefits of testing a lot of different conditions. I've made a couple of videos about scouting, which can help you test different conditions faster. I'll link them below, and good luck with your purifications.